In 1931, Japan began building their empire in Asia. First, the Japanese overran Manchuria. Then, they moved into China, where they were initially successful, but ultimately encountered the resistance of the Chinese. By 1941, they completely occupied French Indochina. Japan was successfully building an empire in East Asia, which concerned some of the Western powers. The United States, the Netherlands, and Great Britain all set up strict economic restrictions on Japan, cutting off 90% of the raw materials Japan required for war production. Japan was forced to choose between abandoning their efforts or to seize other areas rich in raw materials. Japan chose war. They believed the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor was their only threat and set out to neutralize the fleet with a surprise attack. At 7:45 a.m. on December 7, 1941, Japan begins their attack on Pearl Harbor, an attack that led to the United States officially entering World War II.
They left early in the morning. Japanese fighters took off from their aircraft carrier 200 miles north of Pearl Harbor. Under the veil of night, the Japanese formation headed towards Hawaii. 7th of December, 1941, Sunday morning. The U.S. Navy's Pacific Ocean headquarters, Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. On the island, the church service held for American sailors has begun. Japanese pilots arrived on the scene in 1.5 hours.
まあ一応ね、生きて帰るかどうかということは考えなかったから。
I didn't know if I would return alive from this action, so I wrote my will and handed it to my family. On the flight, I had the photo of my wife and my son with me.
Japan's expansion began in the 30s. In the reign of Emperor Hirohito, the country of the rising sun wanted to become a world leader. The brutal war against China showed that Japan put all possible effort into achieving this goal. Hundreds of thousands fell victim to the invaders' terror, and this was only the beginning. July 1941, Tokyo listened to the radio speech of the U.S. President. America introduced an oil embargo against Japan.
There was danger that it would drive the Japanese into a corner that they might feel there was no escape from but war. Every time a taxi went around the corner after the embargo was in effect, they had less oil.
August 1941. Representatives of the United States and Japan were working for peace in Washington. Negotiations were stalling. America stood by its former position, but Japan needed an urgent oil supply.
Well, the frustration was intense. One of the major developments after very late in the game was a proposal of November 26, which the U.S. government sent to Tokyo, and which was regarded in Tokyo as an ultimatum.
War seemed to be inevitable. For General Yamamoto, the American station in Pearl Harbor was a knife at his neck. The last minutes of peace. 6th of December, a few minutes before the 8th, Pearl Harbor. People are playing baseball in the harbor. The spectators are injured. American soldiers. Myrtle Watson, a nurse, takes care of them.
The patients had not been there very long when we saw and heard the planes coming over. It was about 5 minutes of 8, and we would report for duty at 7.
Nobody cared about the planes. People thought that the Americans were doing a military maneuver.
The weather was windy and a little cloudy. We were worried if we would be able to see the target. And then I heard my radio.
Radio news informed the Japanese troops. The surprise had worked.
It was quite a surprise, but the minute I stepped up on main deck, I saw a Jap plane bank, and off of us, and he'd been strafing our ship after he dropped the torpedo.
The Japanese sank a dozen ships with their first attack. The proud Navy was totally defenseless against an air attack.
The planes were so low, we could see the rising sun, the Japanese logo. We could see those scarves, those bandana-like things the pilots wore around their neck, and they were so low they were grinning at us.
The men distributing death were scared as well.
I was diving and I saw that tracer bullets were flying in my direction. I knew that the bullets I could see couldn't hit me. It's always the ones you can't see which cause death. I had no time to think about things like that. The enemy was waiting for me.
Pearl Harbor was in flames. The huge American warships turned out to be an easy target.
We climbed over bodies and got up to the guns, and we started replacing people that were literally sitting there dead or injured, and we pulled them off the guns and manned them.
There was no safe area on the island. The Japanese attacked anything that moved. There were corpses all over the harbor.
They're bringing the casualties in so fast they can't separate the dead ones from the live ones. They have them piled on top of one another, and the sergeant is going around with a syringe of morphine, giving them an injection. That was the best he could do.
In the end, Arizona, the flagship of the Pacific Ocean Fleet, was sunk. The balance, 2,500 victims. Japan forced the U.S. to enter the war. The ultimatum was sent later.
Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive.
Roosevelt prepared his compatriots for a long fight. The day of the Pearl Harbor attack would never be forgotten.
A date which will live in infamy.
When the attack was finished, over 2,400 people were killed and over 1,000 people were wounded. And so on the next day, FDR asked Congress for a declaration of war against Japan. In this speech, FDR delivered one of his most famous lines at the very beginning of the speech. Listen to this.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. It will be recorded that the distance of Hawaii from Japan makes it obvious that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. During the intervening time, the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expressions of hope for continued peace. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Many refer to that speech as the Day of Infamy speech, and it was very effective at the time because it rallied a country still battling the effects of the Great Depression. Although the United States cut Japan off from oil exports, Japan had already decided that they were going to get their oil from invading other countries. They felt that it was necessary to beat the United States to the punch and attack because they already knew that war with the United States was inevitable.
My grandfather was born and raised in Ireland, didn't come to the United States till he was 19 years old. And he wanted to do one thing, was be an American, see. I had figured out that I was going to make the Navy my career. What's a career? It's 20 years minimum.
During the early morning hours of December 7, 1941, Aviation Ordnance Chief John Finn was enjoying a well-earned off-duty Sunday in the tropical paradise of Kaneohe Bay, a naval air station on the northeast side of Oahu. Unbeknownst to Finn and the rest of the station's crew, they were to become the first victims of a lethal Japanese armada making its way towards its primary target, Pearl Harbor.
Kaneohe Bay was a new station. They think they got it going in 1938. My squadron was the last one to get there. VP 11 and 12 were already there and well in operation when my squadron arrived there with their brand new plane. They'd also just built beautiful, I mean nice quarters for enlisted men. My wife and I, we had a 3-bedroom quarter, and we just got into it, maybe several months, right on the base. And it's about a mile from where our quarters was located at the base of this Waialoa Hill, down to the bayfront where they launched and retrieved these big patrol planes. Now, comes December the 7th, and it was early in the morning. The quarters were so new we didn't even have curtains up on the windows yet. And I saw a plane flash by there. Hey, and all my naval knowledge, it happens to anybody. You know certain things. What the hell? Why is that plane not flying the flight? Why is this single-engine plane? Hey, our plane's got 2. Hey, all of a sudden, who's firing machine guns? That's my business. I mean, the war is now there, right now. One minute I'm warm in bed with a pretty blonde, and the next minute I'm down there. Japs are there. Okay. I got in my car and Eddie Sullivan come out. We didn't even say good morning. I always gave him a ride to the parachute launch. He didn't have a car. Got on that road that led down to the hangars. Made a big curve around the base of that hill. And I got about halfway around that hill now, and I heard a plane approaching from the rear, a big roar astern of me. And I looked at that old dirty red meatball with the red ball on both wings. I said, Sully, this is the real McCoy. It's the G.D. Japs. He said, yeah. Didn't say a word. I threw that old Ford in second gear, and man, from then on, I broke every speed law that was ever set. I'm on my way to the hangar now, full bore. I looked to my left, and I saw some black smoke coming on the bay side of that hangar. I had to run from my car to the armory. It was a good 50-yard dash across the hangar alone. And just as I got into the hangar there, I heard machine guns going on. When I got out there, on my left was Robert J. Peterson manning a .30 caliber machine gun. Over here was my big Indian boy from Oklahoma, Bucky Walters. He was manning a .50 caliber gun. And they had the guns right smack as close as they could get to the wall of the hangar. Hangar's a huge building. All right, I said, Pete, for God's sakes, move your gun out. You're going to shoot the top of Bucky's head off. And he says, we can't, Chief. They're just shooting at us. I grabbed Bob's machine gun, and I drug it out there, I guess, about 25 yards. I wanted to be able to see over that hangar. You can't see through it. And I didn't know at that time just where all these planes were coming from, but I know I could see where they'd been. Planes are starting to fire. So I shot at a Jap plane. I'd be a liar if I said I hit him. You don't shoot a plane out of the air with a 30 or a 50 caliber, even 20, 40 millimeter guns can riddle a plane, and the damn thing will still come on plan and maybe make it back to base. But I'd be a worse shot in the world if I didn't hit some of them.
Although hit by shrapnel in 21 places, Chief Finn continued to return the Japanese fire and coordinate his comrades' defensive maneuvers. It was only after the attack was over and his men were out of danger that he was persuaded to seek medical treatment.
I was going back and forth, kicking a fanny here, screaming and hollering. I was a chief. I was a live chief. I had a 35-man ordnance crew. And of course I got the hell shot out of me, but it didn't kill me. And if you ain't dead, you can still manage to monkey around a little bit. This ceremony took place on the 15th of September, right on the flight deck of the USS Enterprise in Pearl Harbor. Admiral Nimitz was there, and he said, "Do not think for an instant," this is the nitty-gritty, "do not think for an instant that we have the enemy on the run. He is a tough, determined, brave, sagacious enemy." He used 4 or 5 adjectives to describe the Jap action. And he says, "But we are making progress." You don't know what that meant to me when he said, "But we are making progress," because everywhere it seemed out there in the Pacific, we were getting our socks knocked off by the Japs. And the monetary damage is just one thing. The big loss there was the loss of all those men when the Arizona toppled over, Oklahoma laid over, and all throughout the fleet there was loss of life here, there, and everywhere. My deal is inconsequential the way I see it. Some of those guys, you just cannot believe what they did. What they were fighting for was our freedom and our right to liberty and justice and love of God, whatever God used to worship, to have that freedom.